Today's book is Enshittification: Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It by Cory Doctorow. Introduction: Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It names and diagnoses a modern sickness of the digital world. The predictable, three-stage decline of platforms that begin by serving users well and end by extracting value from everyone involved, turning useful services into grinding inconveniences and closed prisons. Doctorow traces how business incentives, concentration of market power, and perverse feedback loops produce a cycle where platforms first woo users, then prioritize paying business customers over users, and finally squeeze those business customers until the platform itself becomes hollowed out and brittle financial times. This book is both a forensic account of how well-known services decayed and a blueprint for disenshittification through policy, design, and collective action. Chapter 1: Naming the Problem and Mapping the Cycle. Doctorow opens by insisting we need the right word for what's happening. Enshittification is not mere decline or temporary annoyance but a structural process that reliably follows a playbook. He lays out the three-stage arc. 1. User-first growth that builds genuine value and trust. 2. Monetization that privileges business customers and advertisers over users. 3. Clawback against business customers that concentrates value back into the platform and leaves everyone worse off. The narratives and signs he describes, more ads, more paywalls, murkier search results, and rising costs hidden as convenience, are presented as a pattern visible across industries, not isolated product decisions. Chapter 2: How Goodness Becomes Leverage. This chapter follows the moment a platform has earned trust and network effects and then begins to convert that trust into leverage. Doctorow explains how initial generosity, free features, incentives to join, low friction, creates a dependency. Once users are locked in and switching costs or network effects are high, platforms can alter rules, degrade features, or introduce fees with minimal immediate penalty. He connects that dynamic to real-world examples of companies that swapped user-serving incentives for short-term revenue strategies, showing how design choices that once created value become tools for rent-seeking and control. Chapter 3: The Platform's Customers Change. Doctorow traces the shift in who a platform considers its customer. Early on, users are the customer in practice because attracting them creates future value. As corporate advertising and enterprise relationships scale, the paying customer becomes advertisers, suppliers, and integrators. Doctorow details how product decisions, prioritization of API access, and search or recommendation tweaks start reflecting business customer incentives rather than user welfare. The consequences include worse discovery, promoted or paid placements rating higher than legitimate results, and engineered friction that converts attention into extractable revenue. Signals that a platform is mid-cycle in the enshittification process. Chapter 4: Examples from search, social, and marketplaces. Doctorow offers concrete case studies to make the pattern plain. He shows how major search engines altered ranking and result presentation to generate more ad impressions and clicks, producing worse immediate outcomes for users while boosting revenue. Marketplaces like large e-commerce platforms saw search results favor higher margin or platform-favored vendors, making the genuinely best product harder to find and empowering counterfeit or predatory listings. Social platforms, once engines of connection and low-friction sharing, evolved into attention factories with opaque algorithms that privilege engagement and monetizable behaviors over authentic social value. These examples show the same sequence: initial utility, monetization, and eventual degradation as platform incentives shift financial times +1. Chapter 5: Suppliers, Sellers, and the Slow Squeeze. This chapter turns attention to the small businesses, creators, and sellers who become the platform's business customers, and later its victims. Doctorow explains how platforms extract margin through fees, algorithmic demotion, and by replacing independent sellers with in-house or partnered offerings. The pattern is that platforms first depend on suppliers for content and products, then use their control to capture value from those suppliers, increasing prices, lowering transparency, and raising barriers to survive on the platform. The long-term effect is hollowing of vibrant ecosystems into vendor-dependent monocultures controlled by the platform itself. Chapter 6: The Regulatory and Competitive Failures That Let This Happen. Doctorow examines why competition and regulation have failed to prevent enshittification. He argues that market concentration, lock-in effects, and regulatory capture or neglect create an environment where platforms can degrade service without immediate penalty. When switching costs are high and interoperable alternatives are weak or non-existent, users cannot discipline platforms through market exits. Doctorow links these structural defects to public policy choices and the incentives that shape corporate behavior, calling attention to how antitrust, interoperability, and data rights are central levers that have been underused or misapplied. Chapter 7: The Human Costs, Trust, Labor, and Civic Life. Beyond product-level annoyances, Doctorow traces the social and human consequences of enshittification. He shows how erosion of trust in platforms creates broader harms. Creators and journalists find monetization unstable, workers face surveillance, gigification, and feature gating. Civic discourse degrades as attention economies amplify polarizing or low-quality content. Platforms extraction undermines the informal economies that rely on predictable, user-centered systems, and the cumulative effect is a poorer digital public sphere and strained livelihoods for many who rely on these systems. Chapter 8: Paths Out, Interoperability, Portability, and Open Protocols. Moving from diagnosis to remedy, Doctorow outlines technical and policy interventions that restore competitive pressure and empower users. He champions interoperability, making platforms talk to one another, and portability, letting users take their social graphs, reputations, and data with them. He argues that these measures reduce lock-in, reintroduce choice into markets, and realign incentives toward user value. Doctorow frames these fixes as practical, concrete engineering and legal changes that can limit platforms' ability to weaponize control over data and access. Chapter 9: Regulation that Works, Rules, Remedies, and Enforcement. Doctorow turns to the design of regulation itself. Not all rules are equally effective. He argues for policies that target the root mechanisms of enshittification, non-discrimination in ranking and promotion, limits on self-preferencing, meaningful data portability mandates, stronger enforcement resources, and remedies that restore competition rather than simply levy fines. He paints a picture of regulatory architecture that is proactive, nimble, and oriented toward interoperability and consumer sovereignty, insisting that the law should make it harder for platforms to extract value by degrading their services. Chapter 10: Organizing, Designing, and Building Alternatives. Doctorow is not fatalistic about the dominance of big platforms. He explores how technical design choices, civic organizing, and new business models can create resilient alternatives. He highlights cooperative platforms, federated networks, and product designs that prioritize modularity and user control. He also stresses the role of collective action, developers, users, creators, and policymakers coordinating to pressure platforms and to build interoperable ecosystems. These bottom-up and policy-backed strategies together can create a landscape where enshittification is costly and reversible. Chapter 11: The Tactics of Disenshittification. This chapter assembles a tactical playbook: what activists, designers, and policymakers can do next. Doctorow lists concrete moves: open APIs, enforcement of anti-self-preferencing rules, default to portability settings, user-led governance experiments, and legal remedies that restore competition and choice. He emphasizes the need for both technical standards and political pressure to make those standards stick, and he frames these tactics as cumulative steps that, taken together, can make platforms accountable and useful again. Chapter 12: Looking Forward, A Less Awful Internet. In his closing chapters, Doctorow imagines a future in which markets and policy align to keep platforms honest. He is clear-eyed about the scale of the task but resolute that change is possible. The book reframes enshittification as a solvable set of design and policy failures rather than an unavoidable destiny. Doctorow offers hope through examples of interoperability wins, nascent cooperative projects, and regulatory proposals that focus on restoring the user's primacy in platform economics. Conclusion: Enshittification is both a diagnosis and a call to action. Doctorow gives us a lexical frame to recognize when services are being hollowed out, a structural map of how incentive shifts produce that hollowing, and a practical set of remedies, technical, economic, and legal, to push back. The central lesson is that the internet's quality depends on aligning incentives with people's needs. When platforms are forced to serve users again, through portability, interoperability, enforcement against self-preferencing, and collective action, they will have to compete for human value instead of extracting it. Doctorow leaves the reader equipped to spot enshittification, argue for concrete fixes, and participate in building less exploitative digital systems. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check the full version of the book on description. Like and subscribe helps us to give more. See you next book.